Welcome to Crazy Critters. This is Joe Kenney. He's the man who knows all about the animals. And Joe, to get started with, why don't we tell people how you got involved with all these animals way back when?
So I've been doing animals as long as I can remember. To be honest, it started off when I was a real little guy, probably like 2-ish. So I'd go outside, collect the animals. My mom would distract me by catching frogs or bugs, whatever was crawling around under rocks, setting up cages. And then eventually it went from the little bugs in the yard to wanting things at the pet shop, going down there, checking out the lizards, checking out the frogs, the more weird things, right? And then they'd slowly start coming home. They became pets. And then when I was about 12, I did my first program at a local library. It's actually at the Pembroke Library.
Yeah.
It was my very first program. They asked me to come in, show the kids some animals. I loved it. And then the next show I did, which was like a real show, me talking, presenting stuff, was for a school teacher. And I was actually selling her husband, who owned a pet shop, I was selling him some fish tank coral. When I was younger, instead of doing like, I don't know, sports and normal kid stuff, right? I bred fish corals. So I was breeding the corals, I was breeding different fish like clownfish and stuff like that. And I had brought him to the little pet shop, and he was buying them. He asked if I could show them off to the teacher, and that's kind of how it started. It just kind of rolled. I was about 12 when I started doing it.
It's kind of like Habitat for Non-Humanity.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So and then it just kind of rolled. So it went through. I did it all through high school, through college, and then it just continued. I never really stopped.
And you've made a real business out of it.
Yeah, it's become a real business, which is crazy to me, but
knows you, and they expect to see you at all the events around town.
Yeah, so I do
doing it for
a lot of the town events. I do a lot of the local schools. See a lot of the familiar kids. The kids all know me by name, or at least most of them do if they are in the local areas, from being at their schools, camps, fundraisers, all that kind of stuff. Do birthday parties too.
And they love handling the animals.
Yeah, they love it. And for me, when I was young, I loved the animals, and it was really a way for me to learn. I was dyslexic, so learning about animals made me have somewhat of a care to like pull my attention. So my mom could get me to sit down and at least look at a book, right? If it had some pictures of a lizard or a snake or a frog, something that was a little bit different in it. And that's really kind of how I learned. I ended up reading a lot of books, started doing shows and presentations, and then as that happened, I had to start to learn more and more. Got fascinated with like the habitats that these animals come from, some of the legislation around them, and just kind of evolved.
When you actually got into college, you started studying. What was your major?
So my major was biomed, with molecular biology. I did it in the plans of going on, doing grad school and all that kind of stuff, but it's not my thing, right? Sitting in an office, sitting in a lab, can't do it, right? So I'm a little bit more active. So the animal thing, it kept falling back, and I graduated college and really pursued the animal stuff, and it became a thing, right? It grew, and now it's full-fledged business, and it's how I make my living.
You actually become more of a naturalist than you are a biologist.
Yeah, I guess more of a naturalist than a biologist, right? Study pretty much anything outside. I love it. I like doing outdoor activities, stuff like that, so I'm going to be out there camping, hiking, crawling through the swamp. Try to make it down to Lake Florida. I love Florida. It's got some great reptiles from all over the world, so always trying to make it down there, Central America. Just love seeing the stuff that I read about as a kid, and that's really how it started.
And the Great American Desert. Have you?
I actually have not seen the Great American. I've been in California deserts, and but not like Colorado and stuff like that, where I think the real deserts, Utah, some of the real deserts. So that's actually the plan for this coming year, is seeing some of the deserts.
All of that stuff from Utah all the way down,
all the way
through
down
into Mexico.
Yeah, through into Mexico and Yucatan Peninsulas and all that kind of fun stuff. That's the next mission. I liked the jungly stuff first, so I got through a lot of that and kind of started rolling. But
Okay, wonderful. Now we've got some kind of a background on who Joe is. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with some animals to show you. Now this animal is not a representative of any insurance company. We can say that. We can say that right off the fact. This is a chameleon. He does funny things with colors sometimes. We're going to see if we can get him to actually change some colors here.
color changing.
Yeah.
So these little guys are super cool. This is a Veiled Chameleon, and I brought him. We're going to talk a little bit. He's kind of a weird tickly feeling when he crawls on you guys, so he feels a little pinchy.
Oh, he's got some.
Yeah, he's
claws
got
in
some
there to
little
hold
pinch,
on to.
right?
Yeah.
So these guys are super cool animals. So there's some neat things with them. One of the big things that I like to talk about with these guys is they have some really crazy adaptations to survive some incredible environments. They can live in anywhere from like sub-arid areas, which is their natural habitat. They're actually from Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and these guys will live down in like the ridges between mountains, where it's actually a little bit cooler, and they actually get some small like scrubby brush where these guys are going to be living. So they can go quite a long time without water and food, but they can also live in pretty wet areas, which allows them to have a pretty big range in which they can survive. So these guys are now a strange one that you can actually find here in the United States in a couple of places. The primary one would actually be southern Florida, and these little guys, a lot of times people will be out hanging around. You can find them in the bushes around hotels and stuff like that. They are really neat animals. They can get a little bit bigger than this guy. This guy's only about 8 months old, so he's still pretty young, and he'll grow to be somewhere around 20 inches long. Right now he's probably in that like maybe 12, 14 inch long range. They have this huge crest, which is where they get their name of Veiled Chameleon, because it's like a veil over them. But they also have some other really cool things. So they have eyes that rotate in their head, and those eyes can actually rotate independently. So he can look at
That's one of the
different
funny
things.
things about these guys.
Yeah,
It's
the
like
weird
eyes
little
going-
bubbly eyes and never looking in the same direction. And they also have a tongue, right? So if you hear anything about chameleons and their, like how they eat, it's always like the big tongue sticking out, grabbing their food, right? That's the big thing with chameleons. People think of like frogs like that, but it's really the chameleons with that long, sticky tongue. Their tongue can be as long as their body, which is wild, right? And they're eating a lot of insects.
Wasn't there a character in the animated Madagascar that was
Yeah,
a chameleon?
so
and you could watch the eyes go in different directions?
Madagascar, yeah, so you can see them in like eyes go in different directions. They've had them in a couple of different movies. I think one of the Dr. Dolittle movies had them in there. But the chameleons are really cool. And Madagascar is one of the primary areas to find chameleons. They have more species of chameleons than anywhere else in the world in Madagascar. They've evolved really, really neat to be in little different niches and different colors, different sizes, crazy array of chameleons. But they're also found throughout Africa. And like I said, they're what we call an invasive animal, which means that they're not supposed to be in an area, but they've kind of moved in, right? These ones aren't so much a problem, so they're not going to harm the other wildlife. They're going to eat some bugs and stuff like that. And one of the things that I think is crazy about these guys, so like I think it was Rango or something like that. It was like a kid's Disney movie with a chameleon in it.
Yes,
Western
yes.
thing, right? So one of the original ways that chameleons became a problem, right? They live in the trees, so that's why we got him up on the stick like that. He's hanging out. That's where he's comfortable. But what's happening was these farmers were realizing in their groves, like the groves of citrus groves and stuff like that, your lemons, your limes, all the citrusy fruits that were being grown in Florida in the hot tropical weather, right? We're getting pest it with bugs, right? So at some point, some person, right, farmer, said, I'll stick some chameleons in the trees. They'll eat bugs. And they also would breed. So then what would happen was these farmers would keep chameleons. They'd put them in their tree. They'd grow from tiny little babies to bigger ones. And then the farmer would collect them and sell them back as pets, right? So they became like what they call chameleon ranching. And obviously you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to be letting non-native critters loose into the wild. But what they were doing was actually it was happening, right? And they were trying to fix a problem while still making some money. I can't really blame them, right? But it has now obviously spread. Generally, they'll stay in the same little area, but they kind of moved around and they became a little bit of an issue just because they're popping up in different places. Not really hurting the environment, having them around. They don't really eat anything too influential other than outside of the bugs and pests and stuff like that.
And hopefully a lot of mosquitoes.
Oh, yeah, hopefully some mosquitoes, right? In Florida especially. But no, they're eating like the grasshoppers and stuff like that. Cockroaches are a big one.
Oh,
right? At home, he actually eats one of his favorite
Nobody
foods.
feels bad for
right?
a cockroach that's being
Yeah,
eaten.
most people aren't feeling bad when the cockroach population goes down. So these little guys are really neat. And an animal that's not supposed to be here, but we don't really think of them as a bad thing. More so, it's just something kind of neat and new.
Yeah.
Not really damaging the environment too much. But some of the animals do damage the environment. So there's some animals that are a little bit more of a problem in Florida. We'll talk about some of them in just a minute. But these guys, not too bad, and they do have some really crazy things. Outside of them being an invasive thing, they got these wicked cool little hands. Their hands are like little mittens, and they got, if you can kind of pull them up there, you can kind of see those little toes in there, right? They're kind of shaped like kind of pinchers, right? And that's why when he's crawling around on you, you can feel him pinching, right?
Instead of an opposable thumb, it's supposedly
it's like a whole little mitten going on there, right? And so they also have, well, let's see if we can pry him off of this thing, that crazy tail. So that tail is a prehensile tail, so he can like grab things with it and give it a little hang, right? And he uses that like a third hand, right? So when he's climbing around in the branches, he's gonna do that. They move incredibly strange. So they're very like precise movers. They almost kind of do like, you know, like that walk like an Egyptian kind of thing, right? They'll do like one foot in front of the other, give it a little wiggle, and they're trying to mimic leaves. That's actually what the crest helps with.
Yeah.
When he's puffed up, he kind of merges that crest right into his spine. He looks almost identical to a leaf. Even with some of like the lines in there and stuff like that, they pretty much blend in.
Yeah,
They are pretty cool.
That's why the colors can change, because as he moves up, he's got to change with the surroundings.
Yeah, so they change a little bit. So depending on where these guys live, they're going to be different colors, right? He's not going to, if I put him down on the gray table, he's not going to turn gray. If I put him on your blue shirt, he's not going to turn blue. But what he does do is he uses that to imitate like moods, temperatures. If these guys are cold, what's going to happen is they're going to get darker. So that dark color helps to absorb some of the heat from the sun and warms them up, gets them nice and going, gets them their energy.
You and I would be the ones turning blue, not him.
Yeah, right, exactly. We'd be turning blue right in the cold. So these little guys typically would be that green color because their normal background environment is green. So they'd be blending in. They'd be in the bushes and the brush. But when he gets into like season, he starts looking for the ladies, right? Or he sees another boy coming around. These guys will flash a lot of colors, and they'll get a lot of color change going in there. And that is to kind of act as a warning. And the same thing, if he gets really scared, he'll open up his mouth, he'll start puffing and hissing. I've honestly never been bitten by a chameleon. I know they could bite. They got little teeth in there, right, made for crushing up those bugs. But I've never been bitten by one. They're very much so an animal that's using that as like a defense. They're flattening out. They're a lot of show and not really too scary, but neat little things. These were one of my first weird pets. That was outside the normal pet shop pets. And now people do have these guys as pets. You can get them at a lot of local pet shops. They're
I seem
a
to
little
remember back in the 50s, people used to get small ones and put them on a little chain and pin them to the...
Pin them on, yeah. So
a movable
a lot of things
jewelry.
have changed over the years with the the pet reptiles and stuff, and now we've realized some of the things that they need to have a better environment. Chameleons don't drink water out of a bowl or still water, so these guys actually have to drink like raindrops, or they're drinking dew in the morning off of like the leaves. So you got to really spray them down, keep them nice and wet. And getting them hydrated is a little bit more difficult than some of the other lizards. They also eat live insects. So while these guys are hunting around, right, that means you'd have to bring home live bugs to your house. A little bit inconvenient for some people, but for me, it's a normal part of life, right?
Yeah. Okay, well, do you think we should stop and
I think we can
try
show
something
up
else
over,
now?
do another one.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back with something else. Well, here we have now a very small version of the Burmese python. This one is leucistic, which means that he's white, but not an albino.
Not an albino, so he's a little bit different than albino, guys, right? He is white. There's actually a couple of variations of white snake, right? They don't all come from the 80s either, but these guys
And they're not all rock
right?
bands
Yeah,
either.
they're not all rock bands,
Because
right?
it was a white snake was the name of a rock band back then.
Right? These little guys are pretty cool. They come from Southeast Asia, and in Southeast Asia, they're great. They're beneficial to the environment, and they have a lot of benefits, right? They're eating up some of the animals' natural cycle of food, right? But we do also have them here. We're seeing them a lot on the news, South Florida, right? These guys in the Everglades is their big concern with these guys. But the Burmese python, right? This little one is only about maybe 2.5 months old right now, so he's still a pretty little guy.
He's close to being 3 feet long.
Yeah, he's probably, if you stretch him out, he's probably getting up there, right? Probably around 30 inches long. And right now, at this size, not so concerning, right? They do grow incredibly fast. So a Burmese python can reach, in its first year of growth, up to about 7-8 feet long. That's under ideal conditions, of course, right? Getting food, water, all the things that it needs. Now, in Asia, great, right? But here in the United States, we have Florida that's got a lot of other wildlife, and it's hot, it's tropical, it's swampy, right? And it's a perfect habitat for these guys to kind of establish. Now,
And they can attack animals that are a lot bigger than they are.
So
too.
they do. They eat some pretty big food items, right? So most snakes, when they're eating, they're swallowing the stuff down whole, right? So it's got to eat something within reason, right? So you're looking at something on average that can be swallowed maybe around 6 times the width of their head, right? So something like this, you might be eating something like, I don't know, like that thick around, right?
Yeah.
So he's eating something pretty significant, right?
Because there are stories out there of pythons at full growth fighting alligators down in the Everglades.
So absolutely, right? So these guys are ambush predators. They're going to eat what comes by. They're not eating daily. But if a bird comes by, an alligator comes by, right? Whatever it is, it's going to try to give it a swallow, right? Now, those pictures you're seeing in the Everglades, like eating an alligator, they're probably not your 14, 15 foot long alligator. You're looking at your smaller stuff. But what's happening more so as a concern isn't so much our big stuff, right? The stuff that's making the news. It's some of those small animals and like how it's affecting the changes by eating birds and small endangered rodents. Rabbits, right? Some of the swamp rabbits and stuff like that that are something that needs to be protected, right?
Yeah.
Something that naturally lives here and lives nowhere else. Yeah. So
some of the wild, especially some of the wild tropical birds down there.
Yeah, some of like the migratory birds and stuff that breed down there. It can be a big problem. Now, these guys in their natural environment, right, would be a brown color. They'd kind of blend in, camouflage extremely well, and they kind of wait. They live in kind of dry, leafy areas, maybe seasonally wet, right? And the Everglades kind of gave them that prime spot where there's abundant food all year long, so they're not having that dormancy period. And the other thing that a lot of people talk about is these guys being released pets, right? So that's not necessarily always the case.
Yeah.
Originally, they didn't come here from Southeast Asia, right? They didn't come swimming across the oceans. They came here by people, and that's the pet trade. That's primarily why they're here, right? So
And we can thank Alice Cooper for starting that back in the 60s.
So these little guys,
They camouflaged Alice Cooper.
yeah.
And that was the best they could do for these leucistic ones, because anything would blend in with that guy.
Anything, right? So these little animals right here, they came over as pets. They were kept, and there was a big breeding facility, farm, importer, that got damaged during a hurricane. That was a big mass amount of them that got loose. And that's probably where they came from. It wasn't necessarily always the case that it was like me or you or some kid that went to the pet shop and bought one snake and let it go, right? You'd have to have an awful lot of people be doing that. So the real issue is some of that big collection that got loose, stuff like that. Yeah, you can hold him, right? He feels really cool. He's a little bit weird when you hold him. They're kind of soft.
Since I was a little
right?
kid.
So they feel really neat when you feel them. They are very, very soft snakes. They're actually pretty common in the leather industry.
Yeah.
So that's your python skin stuff, right?
Because what they're looking for is they're looking for the natural colors on these
Yeah,
things,
so
for the
this
skin- for
one,
the
not
skin.
necessarily because he's just all white, right? But these are some of the more common pet ones. So these aren't something you'd find out slithering around. You're finding some of the native colored ones. We can show you a bigger one. In just a second, I'll pull them out and we'll get you guys to see what one of these guys looks like at around 5 years old. So in just a short period of time, we'll show you a full-grown adult one of these guys. At 5 years old is pretty big. And the one that I'm going to show you guys isn't even fully grown. It's an adult,
Oh, I remember how heavy
she's
it was.
got some
'cause
growing to do.
You threw them at me at the Founders Day a few weeks ago.
Yeah. So we had him
Boy.
out. You held him, right? He's
Yeah.
a heavy animal. So we'll get him out in just a second here, and we'll show you what a slightly bigger one looks like.
Okay, well, I guess it's time for us to take another little break so we can put this little guy away and get out Big Mama. Well, here we are back again. Here's Big Mama. You can see her face. And you can see what a Burmese python looks like with the normal coloring on it. And how long is she now? Here,
So
Joe?
this one here, guys, she's about 11 feet long, and she is pretty neat. So she's leaving a little pattern there, kind of cool, right? But these guys are really cool. So this is the normal colored Burmese python you'd find slithering around out in South Florida or out in Southeast Asia. Now, this one in particular is pretty cool. She came in as a rescue, I don't know, about a year or so ago with some pretty big head wounds. She had a rough beginning.
So
yeah,
on her
you'll see the
snout?
little scarring on her snout. She
Yeah.
kind of sheds that out, and it shows some of the tenacity of these animals. These guys can live through a lot. So a lot of times you find these out in the wild, they're not pristine, they got scars and stuff on them. These guys, as a pet, right, are very docile, they're very gentle, but out in the wild, they have to live in some pretty harsh environments. So these guys can be a little bit tough, they can be a little bit scary. Right now, me and you are holding her, she's being really good, she's hanging out with us, right? But in the wild,
she's pretty heavy too.
yeah,
Just like
she's pretty heavy. She weighs right now around 75 pounds-ish, right? She's got a little bit of weight to her.
She felt a
Right,
lot
she,
heavier
yeah,
than that
she
when
does
I had her
feel
wrapped
pretty
around me
heavy,
at the
right,
Founders
guys?
Day.
So these guys can get up to around, some people say 200. I say more of that 150 at a healthy weight, right?
Yeah.
And they can easily reach 18, 20 feet long, and they can eat some pretty big food, right? So
Oh, yeah.
you figure a 20-foot long snake's not having a problem swallowing down a raccoon, maybe two, right? And
Even a medium-sized dog.
yeah, small dogs, right? Not something that doesn't happen, right? And these guys are something that people are now finding in their yards. They're coming up, and even though these guys are a problem, right? They're eating things, they're causing a change in the environment, they're an invasive animal, they're really not great to have around. A lot of times they do kind of get picked on, right? So this is a big target species. It's a big, scary snake,
Yeah.
and right,
And
it
snakes are
shows
one of those
off,
things
right?
that a lot of people are scared
We
of.
already have a fair of them, and we kind of build on that, right? It makes good TV. It makes good publicity, right? Newspaper articles. So this is something right here that we hear a lot about, and then we don't hear about a lot of the other stuff that's happening with invasive stuff. So I think they kind of steal the spotlight, and because of it, they get a lot of attention. But we're missing out on the fish and all the other weird little things that we might not necessarily know about that are also causing a ton of damage in different environments. Now, this guy was a pet. He was a pet. Somebody owned him, and he ended up getting surrendered over to a local animal control, and he was signed over to get some better care. He, needless to say, he was a little bit thin. He's obviously a little bit chunky now. Probably could use a diet, but with time, these guys can become pretty docile and gentle. They are popular pets. They 80s things, right? Jake the Snake was a big thing. I remember that as a kid, right? So these kind of things were in public eye beforehand as a big kind of impressive animal, and then to know they're out in the wild is even scarier. So I think it's something that is a little bit played on, right? You were saying earlier to me about some of the maps you saw, right?
Yes.
So he was seeing maps, they were all the way up in Massachusetts, right?
They had, most of the borders of the states, they had this little thin black line. But every place that they wanted you to believe that they were pythons, they put this big, heavy black splotch. So
right. So a lot of times, right, we're looking at maps where these things could potentially live, right? And the real potential for these guys probably isn't much outside of Florida, right? Maybe some parts of Texas or something like that, if they were to be introduced out there. But the reality is these guys are from Southeast Asia. They need it hot. So at home, he needs an environment that's 90 degrees, right? He needs nice warm spots to kind of digest his food. It gets too cold, they'll get respiratory issues, and they're not going to really survive in a cold environment, or even through some really cold nights in Florida, right? Northern Florida gets some cool nights. You might get a couple of 30-degree nights. That would be enough to knock these guys out.
I would have thought that they would have made it to the Okefenokee Swamp up in Georgia and the Carolinas.
Georgia and all that. I think with those, right, even though it's a hot tropical thing for humans, for a reptile, 60 degrees is cold, right? These guys couldn't eat, they couldn't digest. So I think there's a little bit less of a likelihood of these really spreading too far, but definitely in southern Florida, we're seeing these guys, and I think they're gonna probably be there to stay. I don't think it's something that we can really completely eliminate at this point. I think it's a little bit too late in the game for that. They're probably gonna work their way into the environment, not so natural environment, but environment, right? But they are really, really cool. They're an animal that I use for my educational programs quite a bit.
She certainly does attract the attention
Yeah, she
of the
attracts
kids
attention
when you're outside.
and fun stuff. The kids love them. And like I said, this one actually does go out with me. She's really, really good. She's got a very good temperament and is a really easygoing animal. Some of the other weird things you see on their head, you don't see any ears, right? So snakes don't have ears. They have those fixed eyelids, so their eyelids are kind of like a scale that covers them and protects them. She's got, if we can spin her head around, she's pretty good about it, right? You can see down here on her nose, those are little heat pits. So even if she can't see you right now, she's feeling you. She knows you're there, right?
Now,
That's how they hunt.
We have come down to the end of this show already. We've got to go and say goodbye to folks, but we'll come back because we're going to be doing more shows. So remember, Crazy Critters with Joe Kenney is around and ready for you and available for next time you want to see some animals like this that you just won't see anywhere else. So until next time, Joe, it's been great having you.
Pleasure as always.
Looking forward to our next show, and we'll be back with more on the next show.